Commander Hayes watched the alien ships arrive one by one. Each one was different from the last. Some ships were huge metal structures that looked like floating cities. Others were small and fast, built for combat. The observation station around Mars filled with representatives from 17 different alien species. Each one had their own reason to be here. They came first. They were tall and lean with skin that shined like polished metal. They had been exploring space for 5,000 years. Their military technology was centuries ahead of Earth's weapons. Ambassador led their group. He walked with the kind of confidence that came from knowing his species had never lost a war. The other aliens were different shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human. Others had more limbs or different numbers of eyes, but they all shared something in common. They looked at the human representatives with doubt. Humanity had only been in space for 100 years. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were basic. Everyone knew that humans should not be sitting at this table as equals. The council chamber was large and circular. Representatives sat in sections that marked their territory. Humans had the smallest section. The meeting started with reports about threats in the galaxy. A hostile species called the was expanding their territory. They attacked other civilizations and took their planets. They had destroyed 7 peaceful colonies in the past 3 years. Everyone knew that they would need to be stopped, but nobody knew how. Ambassador spoke first. His voice was steady and deep. He said that they were strong because they trained their soldiers for 30 years. They used genetic enhancement programs that made their warriors perfect killing machines. He suggested that any species that wanted to fight would need equal technology and training methods. He looked at the humans when he said this. His meaning was clear. Humanity was not ready. Humanity was weak. Sergeant Cooper sat in the human section. He was a big man with gray hair and a straight back. He had been in the Marine Corps for 30 years. He had trained thousands of soldiers. He had seen combat in 7 different conflict zones. When Ambassador finished speaking, Sergeant Cooper stood up. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at the human Marine. Sergeant Cooper did not seem nervous. He did not seem worried about speaking to all these powerful alien representatives. He simply stated the facts about human military training. Our basic training takes 13 weeks, Sergeant Cooper said. His voice was calm and clear. During those 13 weeks, we take ordinary civilians and turn them into soldiers. We teach them to shoot. We teach them to move as a unit. We teach them to think under pressure. We teach them to not quit when everything hurts and everything seems impossible. Ambassador made a sound that showed he was not impressed. It was a noise that showed he thought what Sergeant Cooper said was a joke. The other reacted the same way. 13 weeks was nothing. They laughed at the idea that 13 weeks could create an effective soldier. After those 13 weeks, our soldiers can fight, Sergeant Cooper continued. They understand tactics. They understand the enemy. They understand that their life depends on the soldier next to them. That understanding changes everything. After 13 weeks, they take the fight to the enemy. The council chamber erupted in noise. Different species were talking to each other in different languages. The translation systems worked overtime trying to convert all the conversations into forms that each species could understand. Most of the aliens were not impressed. They were openly mocking. They said that human soldiers were not soldiers at all. They were children who had been given uniforms. Ambassador made a formal statement. He said that they could destroy humanity easily. He said that 13 weeks of training was not enough time to make real soldiers. He said that humanity should accept their position as a weaker species that needed protection. He suggested that Earth should stay out of any military decisions made by the Council. Sergeant Cooper did not respond right away. He looked at each section of the Council. He looked at them with their confidence. He looked at the other species with their doubt. Then he spoke again. We did not ask to be here because we are weak, he said. We are here because we are survivors. Earth is a hard planet. There are storms that can kill you. There are animals that hunt humans. There is disease and cold and heat that can end your life in hours. Humans learn to survive this planet. We learn to work together. We learn to think. We learn to adapt to anything. That is in our blood, Sergeant Cooper continued. That is why 13 weeks is enough, because humans have already been training for their entire existence. They have already learned to be strong. They have already learned to work as a team. 13 weeks just focuses what is already inside them. The council was silent now. Even they did not laugh. What Sergeant Cooper said made sense. Everyone knew that harsh worlds created tough species. Everyone knew that survival made soldiers. Ambassador spoke again. His tone was different now. There was less mockery. He suggested a test. He said the human claim was interesting. He said they should observe human military training and human soldiers in action. If humans really could produce effective soldiers in 13, Sergeant Cooper stood at the entrance to camp. The sun was rising over the training grounds. 30 recruits stood in front of him. They looked scared. They looked unprepared. They looked like nothing that resembled soldiers. This was the beginning of 13 weeks that would change everything. The first day was simple. Sergeant Cooper explained what they would do. They would run until their legs burned. They would carry heavy things until their arms ached. They would sleep little and work hard. They would fail sometimes. When they failed, they would try again. No excuses, no stopping, just doing. The alien observers watched from their secure platform. They had built a structure above the training grounds. They had equipment to measure everything. They had scientists taking notes. They watched as the human recruits started their first run. The recruits could barely make it half a mile before some of them fell down. The observers made their notes. They calculated the recruits' oxygen usage. They measured their muscle performance. They predicted that only a few of them would survive the 13 weeks. The rest would quit or wash out. This was what they expected from weak humans attempting impossible training. By day 3, some recruits wanted to leave. The training was harder than anything they had ever done. Their bodies hurt. Their feet had blisters. Their muscles felt like they were burning. Sergeant Cooper did not care about their complaints. He told them to keep moving. He told them that pain was not injury. He told them that discomfort was not death. One recruit had been a teacher before she joined the Marines. She was smaller than the other recruits. She was weaker physically, but she had something different. When things got hard, she did not think about stopping. She thought about why she was here. She thought about protecting others. She kept running even when her body screamed at her to stop. Another recruit, Joseph Miller, had grown up on a farm in Nebraska. He was quiet and did not talk much, but he was strong in a way that was different from simple muscle. He understood how things worked. He could take a weapon apart and put it back together blindfolded. He could calculate distances by looking at terrain. He could read the wind and understand how it would affect a bullet's path. Hayes was the youngest recruit. She was just 23 years old. She had grown up in a tough neighborhood in Chicago. She had learned young that you had to stand up or you would get pushed down. She had learned that leadership was not about being loud. It was about making people want to follow you because they trusted you. Week 1 was about breaking down the recruits. It was about making them forget their normal lives. It was about taking away their individual identity and showing them they were part of something bigger. They ran together. They ate together. They slept in the same room. They learned that they depended on each other. The alien observers recorded all of this. They noted that the humans were using a method designed to create psychological bonds. They were deliberately removing individual identity. They were deliberately creating a group mentality. They found this primitive. Their own soldiers trained separately. They competed against each other. This group bonding seemed weak to them. Week 3 was about teaching the fundamentals. Recruits learned to use weapons. They learned how to move through combat zones. They learned how to communicate without being heard. They learned how to take cover and use terrain to their advantage. Joseph Miller excelled at the shooting course. He was hitting targets from distances that seemed impossible. Excelled at the tactical exercises. She could look at a map and understand what was happening. She could predict enemy movements. She could plan routes through buildings that would give her unit the advantage. Sergeant Cooper noticed her abilities. He started having her lead small groups during exercises. Hayes excelled at everything. She was not the strongest or the fastest. She was not the best shot or the best tactician. But she had the ability to make others want to follow her. When she was leading, people moved faster. They thought clearer. They believed they could succeed. This was something that could not be taught. This was something that only some people had. Week 6 was the halfway point. Sergeant Cooper looked at his recruits. They were not the same people who had arrived 6 weeks ago. They moved differently. They thought differently. Their bodies were stronger, but more importantly, their minds were sharper. They understood pain was not something to fear. They understood that they could do hard things. The alien observers were beginning to look confused. Their measurements showed that the humans were not becoming superhuman. Their strength was normal. Their reflexes were still slower than other species, but something was happening that the observers could not measure easily. The humans were becoming unified. They were becoming more than the sum of their individual abilities. Week 9 was where everything changed. Sergeant Cooper introduced live fire exercises. Real bullets flew past the recruits. Real explosions rocked the ground beneath their feet. Real danger was present. This was where the real training happened. This was where the humans had to prove they could function under genuine threat. Led her squad through an exercise where they had to defend a position against mock enemy fire. They had to think under pressure. They had to trust each other completely. If one person froze, everyone died in the simulation. But they did not freeze. They moved together like they were parts of a single machine. Joseph Miller was in a different squad, but he faced the same test. He had to navigate through a combat zone filled with enemies. He had to make decisions in seconds that would determine if his squad survived. He did not hesitate. He trusted his training. He trusted his squad. He moved forward with certainty. Hayes was separated from her squad in one exercise. She was alone in simulated enemy territory. She had to survive and reach an extraction point. Most recruits would have panicked. Did not panic. She used everything she had been taught. She used the terrain. She thought tactically. She made it to extraction without being detected. Week 11 arrived. The recruits were not recruits anymore. They were becoming soldiers. Their movements were efficient. Their thinking was clear. Their bonds with each other were unbreakable. They had learned that they would die for the person next to them because that person would die for them. The alien observers were now taking different kinds of measurements. They were not measuring physical abilities anymore. They were measuring decision-making speed. They were measuring how quickly humans could adapt to new situations. They were measuring something harder to define. They were measuring trust. They were measuring unity. They were measuring morale. They were confused. By their measurements, these humans should not be able to function in combat. But their own analysis of tactical decisions showed that the humans were making better choices than they had expected. Something was wrong with their theory about what made soldiers effective. Week 12 and 13 were the final assault course. This was the hardest 2 weeks of the entire training. Recruits had to do everything they had learned in a real scenario. They had to survive. They had to think. They had to work as a unit. They had to push through pain and fear and exhaustion. Squad had to defend a complex building against constant attack. Hayes' squad had to navigate through obstacle courses while being hunted. Joseph Miller had to lead a group across open ground while under fire. All of them succeeded. All of them survived. More importantly, all of them brought their people home alive. On day 91, Sergeant Cooper stood in front of his recruits. They were now Marines. They had been transformed. They were no longer scared civilians. They were disciplined fighters who understood their purpose. They were ready to take the fight to the enemy. Nobody expected the attack to come so soon. They had been expanding their territory for years. Everyone knew it was coming, but nobody thought it would happen while the Alien Council was still at the observation station. Nobody thought they would attack the place where all these powerful species had sent their representatives. The alarm sounded at dawn on the 95th day of training. The human recruits were in the middle of their final training exercises when the warning came through the communication system. 3 warships had jumped out of faster-than-light travel near the observation station. They were not running. They were not signaling for peace. They were moving to attack. Commander Hayes made his decision immediately. He could wait for help from the alien fleets. He could hide the human soldiers. He could admit that humanity was not ready, or he could deploy his Marines. The ones who had finished their training just 4 days ago. The ones that the said could not possibly be effective. Hayes chose to deploy them. He ordered Sergeant Cooper to assemble every available Marine and report to defensive positions. Cooper did not hesitate. He did not question the order. He knew his soldiers were ready. They were a brutal species. They stood 8 feet tall. They had armor that was grown into their skin hard as metal. They had weapons that could destroy a human soldier with a single shot. They had been at war for 1,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of planets. They saw humanity as insects to be crushed. The first landing craft hit the observation station's docking bay. The doors exploded inward. Warriors poured through the opening. They expected to find soft, weak aliens who would surrender immediately. What they found was something different. Was waiting for them. She was in the lower corridor near the docking bay. She had positioned her squad in locations she had studied for hours. She understood the structure of the station. She understood how sound moved through it. She understood how to turn every corner and every room into an advantage. When the first warriors came through, squad opened fire. The armor was strong, but human bullets were effective. The first 3 warriors fell. The rest did not expect resistance. They did not expect to have to fight their way through the station. They expected to walk in and take what they wanted. The corridor became a battle zone. Weapons fire was intense. The energy bolts were hot enough to melt metal, but Squad had trained for this. They moved from position to position. When one location became too dangerous, they fell back to the next prepared position. They slowed the advance. They bought time. Hayes was on the upper levels of the station. She had been assigned to protect the diplomatic delegations. When the attack started, she did not panic. She gathered the alien representatives and moved them to secure locations. But she did not just hide them. She used her knowledge of the station to create defensive positions around them. They tried to reach the diplomatic delegations. Squad stopped them 3 times. Each time they came in with overwhelming firepower. Each time, humans adapted. They used the station's structure. They used darkness and smoke and psychological pressure. They made them think there were more defenders than there actually were. Joseph Miller was assigned to a sniper position overlooking the main corridor. This was where the bulk of the force would have to move. Joseph calculated angles. He measured distances. He understood how to predict where they would go. When they came, he was ready. His first shot took out a commander from 200 yards away. The shot went through a viewport and hit the commander in the chest. It was an impossible shot. Most species could not make it. Joseph made it look easy. He had trained for this exact moment. His rifle was an extension of his body. His mind calculated without thinking. They scattered after the first sniper shots. They took cover. They tried to figure out where the shot came from. Joseph had already moved to a new position. He was 3 steps ahead of their thinking. He shot again and again. Each shot was carefully placed. Each shot eliminated a threat. They were strong, but they were not prepared for an enemy who could think like this. The commander realized they were in trouble. He had assumed this would be an easy operation. Take the station. Kill the weak aliens, leave. But the humans were not weak. The humans were not panicking. The humans were fighting like they were defending their home. The commander tried a different strategy. He brought in a heavy weapon, a cutting torch that could burn through the station's hull. He sent warriors to install it. If he could not take the station, he would destroy it. He would kill everyone on it, including the alien representatives. Saw the weapon being assembled. She knew what it was. She understood the danger. She made a decision that would define everything. She gathered her squad and they moved directly at the position. It was not the tactical choice. It was the brave choice. It was the human choice. Her squad moved through corridors and vents. They moved through the darkness. They moved like they had trained to move. They reached the position from behind, tossed a grenade. It exploded. The warriors fell. The cutting torch was damaged before it could activate. But did not stop. She kept moving forward. She kept fighting. Her squad kept fighting. They pushed the back. They pushed them out of the station. They made them understand that taking this station was not going to be easy. Hayes and Joseph Miller saw what was doing. They understood that the entire defense was shifting. They understood that they were starting to lose. They pushed harder. Squad made coordinated attacks. Joseph kept shooting from his sniper position. They did not stop. They did not think about stopping. The commander realized the truth. These humans were different. They were not like any species he had fought before. They were not stronger. They were not faster. But they were smarter. They were braver. They were more willing to die than to surrender. They understood something about fighting that most species never learned. The first ship tried to leave, but human forces had already moved to block the docking bay. The warriors had to fight their way back to their ship. More died. The commander was furious. He had lost too many warriors. He had lost too much honor. The battle lasted 16 hours. By the end, they had lost over 200 warriors. They had failed to take the station. They had failed to kill the diplomatic delegations. They had failed to do anything except learn that humans were dangerous. The second and third ships tried to finish the job, but now the alien representatives understood what was happening. They sent their fighters. The other species sent their own military forces. They were surrounded. They jumped back into faster-than-light travel and left the system. When the fighting stopped, everyone came out of their protective positions. The station was damaged. People were wounded, but everyone was alive. They had been defeated. Sergeant Cooper looked at his young Marines. They had been soldiers for less than a month. They had fought against one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They had won. They had protected not just their own species, but alien species that had doubted them. The diplomatic chamber was silent. The alien representatives looked at the after-action reports. They looked at the numbers. They looked at the video recordings of the battle. They tried to understand what they had witnessed. 184 warriors had been killed or wounded. 12 human Marines had been wounded. 0 human Marines had been killed. The humans had held defensive positions against an enemy that was physically stronger. The humans had created tactics that worked against superior firepower. The humans had not panicked. The humans had not stopped fighting. Ambassador called for an official council meeting. This was different from the earlier meetings. This meeting was about one thing only: understanding what humans really were, understanding what Sergeant Cooper had meant when he said 13 weeks was enough. Sergeant Cooper was called to present at the council. He stood before all 17 species. He stood before the scientists and military experts and political leaders who had doubted humanity. He did not appear nervous. He did not appear worried. He simply stated the facts. Those Marines had been training for 13 weeks, he said. Before that, they were teachers and farmers and workers. They had no special genetic enhancement. They had no superior technology, but they understood something that mattered more than strength. They understood that they were responsible for each other. They understood that their life depended on the person next to them. That understanding changed how they fought. A scientist asked a question: how much of human capability came from genetics? Sergeant Cooper answered honestly: humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest. Their eyesight was weaker than many other species. Their hearing was worse. Their physical endurance was actually quite limited compared to proper planning and recovery. What we have, Sergeant Cooper said, is the ability to learn fast. We can look at something once and understand it. We can solve problems by thinking about them. We can work together without constant command structures telling us what to do, and we can care about something larger than ourselves. Another scientist asked how much came from the training itself. Sergeant Cooper answered that too. The training was important. The 13 weeks broke down the civilian mindset and built the military mindset. The training taught the body and the mind to work together. The training showed each person that they were capable of far more than they believed. But here is what matters, Sergeant Cooper continued. The training only works because humans have something inside them already. We have been on a hard world. We have been hunted. We have starved. We have been cold. We have been hurt. Humanity learned to survive. Humanity learned to think. Humanity learned to never give up. 13 weeks just brings that out. The observers listened carefully. They were still angry about their defeat, but they understood what had happened. They had underestimated human capability. They had assumed that strength was all that mattered. They had been wrong. A specialist from another species asked how the human training method compared to other methods. Sergeant Cooper explained that most advanced species trained soldiers separately. They made each soldier compete against the others. They created individuals who were strong on their own. That made sense if you valued individual capability above all else. But humans are not individuals, Sergeant Cooper said. We are a unit. We train as a unit. We fight as a unit. We die as a unit. When every person understands that their survival depends on the person next to them, everything changes. The unit becomes stronger than any individual could ever be. The council was silent again. What Sergeant Cooper described was not advanced. It was not new technology. It was not genetic engineering. It was a philosophy. It was an understanding of how to make weak individuals into a strong collective. Commander Hayes stood up. He added his own analysis. He said that humanity's advantage was not in any single area. It was in the combination of adaptability, group cohesion, tactical thinking, and willingness to sacrifice. No single human could beat a warrior, but a squad of humans working together could beat multiple warriors. That is the real advantage, Hayes said. It is not about individual strength. It is about collective power, and we can teach that to anyone willing to learn. They discussed among themselves. Ambassador made a formal statement. He acknowledged that they had been wrong. He said that humanity's training methods represented something valuable. He said that perhaps an alliance would be better than assumptions of human inferiority. The human capacity to create effective soldiers in 13 weeks is impressive, said. But more impressive is their willingness to teach this method to other species. That shows wisdom. Over the next week, the council made several decisions. First, they offered to establish formal military alliances with humanity. Second, they offered to trade technology for training. They wanted to learn how humans trained soldiers. Third, they offered to establish a joint training program where soldiers from different species could learn from human drill sergeants. Sergeant Cooper was asked to lead the effort. He was offered a position as the head of Galactic military training. He was offered resources he had never imagined. He was offered a chance to change how the entire galaxy made soldiers. Cooper accepted, but he made one thing clear. The training would not be easy, the training would not be comfortable, the training would not be kind. If aliens wanted to learn from humans, they had to be willing to suffer like humans suffered. Was asked to become a tactical instructor. She would teach other species how to think about battles. She would teach them how to use terrain and structure. She would teach them how to predict enemy movements. Joseph Miller was asked to lead weapons training. He would teach other species how to use human weapons. He would teach them how to think about distance and wind and trajectory. He would teach them how to remain calm under fire. Hayes was asked to lead leadership development. She would teach other species how to inspire others to follow. She would teach them that leadership was not about being the strongest. It was about being the one others trusted most. The first group of trainees from other species arrived at camp 2 months later. They were and beings from species that had no names in human language. They came to learn. They came to understand how humans made soldiers. Sergeant Cooper stood before them on the first day. He looked at the assembled aliens. They were bigger than humans. They were stronger. They had better eyesight and better hearing. They had advantages in almost every physical way. "None of that matters," Cooper said, "because you are here to learn something more important than strength. You are here to learn how to be a soldier. You are here to learn how to work as a unit. You are here to learn that you are stronger together than you ever could be alone." The training began. The first week was brutal. Species that had trained separately for centuries now had to learn to work as units. Their instincts told them to compete. The training forced them to cooperate. The training forced them to care about species they had previously fought. By week 4, something was changing. The N were starting to understand. The training was not 6 months after the attack. Everything had changed. The observation station around Mars had been transformed. It was no longer just a place for diplomats to meet. It was now a military training facility. It was the center of a new kind of warfare training that would spread throughout the galaxy. Sergeant Cooper stood in the training headquarters. He looked out at the grounds below. Humans and aliens trained together, ran beside warriors. Species that had never worked together before now moved as single units. The impossible was becoming normal. Was in the war room. She taught tactical strategy to officers from 17 different species. She stood at a holographic table showing a theoretical battle scenario. She asked the assembled aliens a simple question. How would they approach this situation? An officer said they would use superior firepower to attack from above. A commander said they would use speed and strength to overwhelm the enemy. An officer from a smaller species said they would use numbers to surround and suffocate the opposition. Listened to all of them. Then she asked another question. What if they were wrong? What if the strongest weapon was not firepower or strength or numbers? What if the strongest weapon was thinking? She showed them what human Marines had done at the observation station. She showed them how Squad had used the structure of the building. She showed them how Hayes had kept diplomats safe not through superior weapons, but through superior thinking. She showed them how Joseph Miller had used knowledge and calculation instead of overwhelming force. The alien officers understood. Tactics was not just about sending more soldiers. It was about sending soldiers in the right place at the right time. It was about understanding the enemy. It was about making the enemy react to your actions instead of reacting to their actions. It was about thinking. Joseph Miller worked in a new firing range. Aliens from every species came to learn human shooting technique. Most of them had never held a human weapon before. Most of them were far stronger than Joseph. Some of them could carry twice as much ammunition. Some of them had better eyesight. But when they tried to shoot like they thought soldiers should shoot, they failed. They tried to use brute force. They tried to overpower the weapon. Joseph made them understand something different. He made them understand that shooting was not about strength. It was about understanding. It was about calculating where the bullet would go. It was about controlling your body so that your intention and your action were the same thing. When you shoot a weapon, you have to become one with it, Joseph said. The weapon is an extension of your mind. Your mind sends the signal, your body executes. The bullet goes exactly where you intended. He showed them human shooting techniques. He showed them how humans could shoot from difficult positions. He showed them how humans could adjust for wind and distance and movement. He showed them how humans could do all of this while under stress and while afraid. Alien soldiers from advanced species struggled with this. They had relied on their superior reflexes. They had relied on their superior strength. They had not relied on understanding. Joseph forced them to understand. By the third week, even warriors were hitting targets with accuracy they had never achieved before. Hayes led the leadership development program. She worked with officers and soldiers from every species. She asked them all the same question: what makes a good leader? Most of them said strength. Most of them said intelligence. Most of them said experience. Listened and then said they were all wrong. A good leader was someone that other people wanted to follow. A good leader made people believe that they could do impossible things. A good leader cared more about the people under them than about themselves. She told the story of what she had done during the attack. She had not been the strongest. She had not been the most experienced. But she had been calm. She had been clear. She had made everyone around her believe that they would all survive. And they did. Worked with future leaders to develop that ability. She taught them to speak clearly. She taught them to move with purpose. She taught them to look people in the eye and tell them the truth. She taught them that leadership was not about being perfect. It was about being honest and being reliable. The training facility grew larger. More species sent their soldiers. Word spread through the galaxy about the human training methods. Species that had never worked together began to cooperate. Military forces that had been independent began to work as combined units. Sergeant Cooper oversaw everything. He was now the commander of the entire galactic training program. He reported directly to the Council of Species. He had authority over military training for the entire allied civilizations. But his greatest power was not authority. It was the respect that he had earned. 6 months into the program, something remarkable happened. A hostile fleet from a previously unknown species attacked a trading station. The response came from a combined force of human and soldiers. They had trained together for less than a year. They had never fought together before, but they moved like a single unit. The humans did the thinking. They understood the terrain and created strategy. They provided the firepower. They overwhelmed enemy positions with superior technology. They provided the strength. They could do things that other species could not do. But none of this would have worked without the training, without the understanding that they were not separate species fighting a common enemy. They were one unit with different abilities. The enemy was defeated. More importantly, the combined force had not lost a single soldier. The message spread through the galaxy. The human training method worked. Not just for humans, for anyone willing to learn, for any species willing to accept that individual strength meant nothing compared to unit cohesion. Trade increased. Technology was shared. Military alliances became commercial partnerships. Economic relationships formed. The galaxy began to unite not through conquest, but through understanding that cooperation was more powerful than competition. 1 year after the battle at the observation station, Sergeant Cooper made a formal address to the Galactic Council. He stood in the chamber where he had stood 1 year earlier. This time there was no doubt. This time there was no mocking. This time there was respect. "When I told you that 13 weeks could create a soldier, you doubted me," Cooper said. "You thought I was arrogant. You thought I was wrong. But I was stating a fact. What we have learned together over this past year is that it is not just humans who can be trained. It is any species willing to accept the training. It is any species willing to work as a unit. It is any species willing to care about something larger than themselves. The who attacked this station are no longer enemies. They are allies. They are brothers and sisters fighting for the same cause. The who mocked human ability now understand that humans offer something valuable. Our training methods have spread to every corner of the galaxy. Hostile species are becoming allies. Wars are ending. Peace is beginning. This did not happen because humans are superior. This happened because humans understood something about war and about peace. We understood that the strongest force in the galaxy is not superior weapons or superior genetic enhancement. It is superior organization. It is unity of purpose. It is the willingness to sacrifice for the collective. The council applauded. It was a sound that crossed species boundaries. It was a sound that showed respect and understanding. Sergeant Cooper looked at. She had been promoted to major. She was now the head of all tactical training. Humans under her command were training thousands of alien soldiers to think like soldiers. He looked at Joseph Miller. He had been promoted to captain. He was now overseeing weapons development for the combined military forces. His understanding of ballistics and precision had changed how other species approached weaponry. He looked at Hayes. She had been promoted to major as well. She was now training the next generation of leaders for the entire Allied military. Officers from every species were learning to lead the way humans led. They were learning that strength without wisdom was just brutality. They were learning that wisdom without strength was just talking. The future was bright. The threat had been resolved not through superior force, but through superior training. Other hostile species heard about the human training methods and requested to join the program. The galaxy was beginning to understand that conflict could be replaced with cooperation. But it all started with one simple conversation. It all started with one sergeant telling the truth about what 13 weeks of training could do. It all started with humans willing to teach what they knew. And it all started with other species willing to listen and learn. The observation station around Mars was no longer just about diplomacy. It was now about forging the future. It was about taking soldiers from 17 different species and making them into one unified force. It was about proving that diversity was not a weakness. It was about proving that when you train together and fight together and trust each other completely, nothing can stop you. Sergeant Cooper walked through the training grounds one evening as the sun set over Mars. Young humans trained next to and aliens from species humans had no names for. They moved together. They thought together. They trusted each other completely. He thought about the day when he had explained 13 weeks of training to skeptical aliens. He thought about how they had mocked him. He thought about how wrong they had been. But more than that, he thought about how right they now understood him to have been. The galaxy had changed because one Marine understood something fundamental about human nature. The galaxy had changed because Sergeant Cooper had answered a simple question with a simple truth. The galaxy had changed because humans knew how to take the fight to the enemy, and because humans knew how to teach others to do the same thing. The future belonged to those who understood that strength was not measured in individual capability. Strength was measured in unity. Strength was measured in purpose. Strength was measured in the willingness to sacrifice for something larger than yourself. That was what 13 weeks taught. That was what humanity had to offer the galaxy, and that was what would define civilization for generations to come. About individual performance, it was about group performance. It was about understanding that your strength meant nothing if your squad failed. By week 8, the aliens were beginning to look different. They moved together with more efficiency. They thought together more clearly. They had started to develop the kind of bonds that made units work. They were becoming something more than they had been before. Sergeant Cooper watched them progress. He saw what he had seen in human recruits. He saw the transformation. He saw weak individuals becoming strong units. He saw beings from different species starting to trust each other completely. The galaxy had changed. They understood that their military approach was not the only way. They understood that genetic enhancement was not the answer. All the species understood that Sergeant Cooper had been right from the beginning. 13 weeks could change everything, not because of magic or advanced technology, but because of understanding human nature, understanding that humans could be trained, understanding that humans could adapt, understanding that humans could learn to care about something larger than themselves. The future of galactic warfare had been redefined, and it started with one sergeant standing up and telling the truth about what humans really were. Was wounded but alive. Joseph Miller had expended all his ammunition but had killed 38 warriors. Hayes had kept every single diplomat in her care alive. They were heroes. They were exactly what Sergeant Cooper had said they would be. They were Marines trained in 13 weeks who could take the fight to the enemy. The alien observers looked at each other. They had seen something impossible become real. They had seen humans do something that challenged everything they thought they knew about military capability. Sergeant Cooper had been right. 13 weeks was enough. The alien observers packed up their equipment. They had seen enough. They had watched ordinary humans become soldiers in 13 weeks. They began to understand what Sergeant Cooper had said. It was not about being superhuman. It was about understanding the human capacity to learn, to adapt, and to believe in something larger than themselves. The test was over. Now came the real challenge. They were attacking. The humans would have to prove that their 13 weeks of training was not just theory. They would have to prove it in actual combat. Weeks, then that would change how the Council viewed things. If humans were lying, then it would be obvious. He proposed that alien observers be sent to human military bases to watch the training. He proposed that human soldiers be tested in real combat alongside alien warriors. Sergeant Cooper agreed without hesitation. He knew what 13 weeks of training did. He knew what human soldiers could do. He was not worried about showing his work to the galaxy. Commander Hayes approved the plan. Within 2 weeks, alien observers began arriving at military bases around Earth. They set up observation posts. They watched every day of training. They recorded everything. They took measurements of human performance. They compared humans to their own military standards. What they found surprised them. The humans were not as strong as, their reflexes were slower than warriors. Their technology was simpler than most other species had. But there was something else, something that the aliens could not measure easily. Humans had something in their eyes. They had something in the way they moved and worked together. They had something that made them more than just their physical abilities. They began to whisper among themselves. Maybe they had been wrong. Maybe the human claim about 13 weeks was not arrogance. Maybe it was something deeper. Maybe humans understood something about training and about war that older species had forgotten. Sergeant Cooper watched the alien observers as he trained his recruits. He saw their confusion. He saw their growing respect. He knew what they would find out soon enough. He knew that when those 13 weeks ended and his recruits took the fight to the enemy, the entire galaxy would understand what humans really were. The test was about to begin.